Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. They say the desert never forgets, and I'm starting to believe that's true. Because somewhere out there, 77 miles from Phoenix, something remembers me, something that shouldn't exist. Something that blooms only when the sun dies. If you're listening to this right now, lying in bed, maybe with your eyes closed, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story. This is a warning about a place where beauty and terror grow from the same poisoned soil. A place I stumbled upon 3 weeks ago and haven't been able to forget since. Before you think I'm crazy, let me ask you this. Have you ever driven through the Sonoran Desert at night? Really driven through it? Not on the interstate, but on those forgotten highways that snake between the saguaros like veins? If you have, then maybe you'll believe what I'm about to tell you. And if you haven't, well, maybe that's for the best. My name is David. I'm 27 years old. I work tech support for a software company in Phoenix. Normal job, normal life, normal everything. At least, I used to be normal. Before I learned that some roads don't appear on any map. Before I discovered that some detours never really end. Now, let me tell you what happened. The story starts here. The GPS died first. That should have been my warning. I was driving back from Tucson to Phoenix, taking Highway 79 because I thought I'd save time. Classic mistake. It was late October, that perfect Arizona weather when the days are warm but the nights have teeth. The sun was bleeding out across the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and rust. When my phone just went black, no warning, no low battery alert, just dead. I wasn't worried, not at first. I'd driven this stretch before. Keep north, hit the 60, slide into Phoenix by 9, easy. But then I saw the construction signs. Road closed ahead, detour. The arrow pointed east toward a road I'd never noticed before. Said Route 238A. The sign looked old, weathered, like it had been baking in the desert sun since the 70s. But the detour markers were fresh. Orange cones lined up like soldiers, forcing me onto this narrow strip of asphalt that cut through the desert like a scar. I remember checking my odometer. 77 miles to Phoenix. That number would matter later. The road was wrong from the start. Too straight, too empty. Not a single other car, which was strange for a detour route. The pavement was smooth though, almost unnaturally smooth. Like it had just been poured yesterday. My headlights carved through the growing darkness, illuminating nothing but endless desert on both sides. The radio died next, static at first, then nothing. Complete silence except for the hum of my engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. I tried different stations, AM, FM. Nothing. Like there were no radio towers for hundreds of miles. Which was impossible. Phoenix radio reached everywhere in the valley. That's when I started noticing the flowers. At first, just glimpses in my peripheral vision, flashes of color where there shouldn't be any. The Sonoran Desert has its blooms. Sure, the Palo Verde trees, the ocotillo, even the barrel cacti. But these were different. These were wrong. They grew in perfect circles, rings of flowers surrounding dead saguaros. Even in the dying light, I could see their petals. White, pure white, like snow in hell, and they seemed to glow, just slightly, as if they were catching light that wasn't there. I slowed down. Had to. The road started curving, gently at first, then sharper, like it was avoiding something, or leading me somewhere specific. The temperature gauge on my dash showed it was 72 degrees outside. but I was shivering. Actually shivering. The air conditioning was broken. When had that happened? It had been working fine when I left Tucson. Now it blew nothing but warm, stale air that tasted of copper and something else. Something organic. Like flowers left too long in water. That's when I saw the first cross. White wood. Freshly painted. A roadside memorial. The kind you see all over Arizona highways. Someone had died here. Recently, judging by the flowers. But these weren't normal memorial flowers. These were the same white blooms I'd been seeing. Hundreds of them. Arranged in a pattern that hurt to look at directly. Almost like they were growing from the cross itself. There was a name. Maria Sandoval. 1997 to 2024. 27 years old. Same age as me. I pulled over. Engine idling. Something about that name nagged at me. Maria Sandoval. I'd heard it before. Recently. But where? The flowers around the cross moved in the windless night. Turned toward my headlights like faces seeking sun. And I swear I could hear something. A whisper. Not words. Just sound. Like wind through leaves. Except there were no leaves. No wind. I got back on the road, fast. Tires squealing on the perfect asphalt. The second cross appeared 5 minutes later. Jason Parks, 1996 to 2024. 28. The flowers here were larger, brighter. They pulsed with their own light now. Definitely their own light. Like heartbeats made visible, then another. Ashley Chen, 1995 to 2024. The arrangement was different here, more elaborate. The white blooms formed spirals and mandalas, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. My speedometer read 45, but I felt like I was crawling. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides. No landmarks, no distant mountains. Just flat nothing disappearing into black sky. By the time I counted the seventh cross, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The dates. They weren't just recent. They were all from this month, this October, and they were getting fresher. The seventh cross bore yesterday's date, October 22nd. A name I didn't recognize, Roberto Martinez, 1994 to 2024, 30 years old. The flowers here were different, smaller, hungrier looking, like they were still feeding. I checked my watch, 11:47 p.m. October 23rd had just begun. The town appeared like a mirage. One moment, empty desert. The next buildings, old buildings, the kind you see in those ghost town tourist traps. Except this place wasn't abandoned. Lights glowed in windows, shadows moved behind curtains. But the streets were empty. The sign said, Noche Flores, night flowers, population. The number had been scratched out, gouged out, like someone had taken a knife to the metal and carved away the digits in fury. I should have kept driving. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but my gas gauge was hovering near empty, and this was the first sign of civilization I'd seen in 40 minutes. There had to be a gas station, had to be. The town was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The buildings were too old, but too well maintained. Victorian houses sat next to adobe structures. A 1950s diner neighbored what looked like a Spanish mission. All different eras, all different styles. Like someone had collected buildings from different times and dropped them randomly in the desert. And the lights. Every window glowed with the same warm amber light. Not electric, not gas. Something else. Something that cast no shadows. I found the gas station. An old Sinclair station. The green dinosaur logo faded, but still visible. The pumps were ancient, the mechanical kind with rolling numbers, but the lights were on. Someone was home. I pulled in, and that's when I noticed the silence. Complete silence. No insects. No wind, no distant traffic, nothing. Just the tick-tick-tick of my cooling engine and something else. A sound so low it was more feeling than hearing, like a massive heart beating deep underground. The other cars parked at the station bothered me. A 1970s Buick, a 2015 Honda, a beat-up pickup truck with California plates, all different years, all from different decades, but all with the same thing, a thin layer of white dust on their windshields. Not desert dust. This was finer, more like pollen. The station's door was open, not wide open, just cracked, like someone had just walked through. A bell should have rung when I pushed it wider. But the clapper had been removed. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed, casting everything in that sick, greenish glow. The shelves were stocked. Recent magazines, fresh coffee in the pot, but no attendant. Hello? My voice sounded wrong. Too loud. Too alive. No answer. I walked the aisles. Everything was normal. Candy bars, chips, motor oil. But the expiration dates were wrong. Some items expired in 1987, others in 2031. Time meant nothing here. I grabbed a water bottle, left a 5 on the counter, and started to leave. That's when I saw the newspaper. Today's date, October 23rd. 2024, the headline, 7th disappearance this month. Authorities baffled. The photo showed a young woman, smiling, alive. The caption, Maria Sandoval, last seen driving through Noche Flores, Maria Sandoval. The first cross I'd passed. My hands were shaking as I picked up the paper. The article was short. 7 people, all passing through, all vanishing near Noche Flores, all found later. Their cars abandoned on State Route 238A. No signs of struggle. No explanation. Just gone. But here's what made my blood freeze. According to the article, Maria Sandoval had disappeared 3 weeks ago, but her memorial cross showed today's date, October 23rd, which meant, I read further, each disappearance happened exactly 1 week apart, always on the same route, always involving travelers who'd taken the construction detour. But there was no construction. According to the Arizona Department of Transportation, Highway 79 had been clear for months. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the date on the newspaper, October 23rd. Today was October 23rd, which meant Maria Sandoval, whose cross I'd passed, whose death date was marked as 2024, was scheduled to disappear today. Maybe had already disappeared. Maybe was disappearing right now. I ran back to my car, fumbled with my keys, started the engine, and saw someone standing in the road, an old woman, Hispanic, wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in my headlights. She wasn't moving, just standing there, arms at her sides, staring at my car. No, not at my car. Through it, like she could see something behind me, something following me. I honked. She didn't move. I inched forward. She didn't move. Finally, I rolled down my window. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She turned her head toward me, slowly, like it hurt. Her eyes were white, completely white, like those flowers, like milk, like bone. "You brought them with you," she said. Her voice was like wind through dead leaves. "They've been following you since Phoenix. 77 miles. They always follow for 77 miles. "What? Who's following me?" She smiled. No teeth, just darkness. "The flowers remember everything. Every death, every soul. They bloom when they're hungry, and tonight they're starving. I don't understand." "What flowers? What are you talking about?" She raised one arm, pointed behind my car. I turned to look through my rear windshield. The road I'd just driven stretched back into darkness. But now there were lights. Hundreds of them, thousands, all along the roadside, all white, all moving, coming closer. "The garden follows the worthy ones," she whispered. "The ones who fit the pattern. 27 years. Like the girl. Like the boy. Like you." What pattern? What girl? But when I turned back, she was gone. Just empty road. And in my rearview mirror, those lights were definitely closer. Much closer. I gunned the engine. Tires screamed on asphalt. But as I raced through the empty streets of Noche Flores, I could see her in every window I passed. The same woman, watching me, following my progress, always one step ahead. The road out of Noche Flores curved into the desert. My gas gauge read empty, but somehow the car kept running. The engine didn't even sound strained. It purred like it was brand new, like it was being fed by something other than gasoline. The headlights started flickering. Not dying, flickering, like something was passing in front of them, something invisible. And in those moments of darkness, in those split seconds when the lights went out, I could see things, shapes moving in the desert. Tall, thin, wrong. My speedometer climbed. 50, 60, 70. But I felt like I was standing still. The landscape didn't change. Same cacti, same rocks, same endless nothing. Like I was driving on a treadmill made of highway. That's when I saw it. The garden. It spread across the desert like a cancer. Thousands, no, millions of white flowers. All glowing with that sick light. All perfectly arranged in spirals and circles and patterns that made my eyes water. Fractals of bloom. Endless recursive beauty that hurt to perceive. And in the center, a massive saguaro cactus. Dead. Black. Its arms reaching toward the sky like it was praying. Or screaming. The thing had to be 200 years old. Maybe 300. A giant among giants. But dead. Completely dead. Not a hint of green anywhere on its massive trunk. The road led straight to it. Of course it did. As I got closer, I saw them, cars, dozens of them, all different years, different makes, but all with one thing in common. They were parked in a perfect circle around the dead saguaro, doors open, engines off, empty. But not all empty. In the 1970s Buick, I could see a figure slumped over the steering wheel. In the Honda, someone sat perfectly upright in the driver's seat, waiting. All of them waiting. All of them perfectly still. My car started slowing down. I pressed the gas. Nothing. The engine was running, but I was slowing, being pulled, like the road itself was drawing me in, like I was iron, and somewhere ahead was the strongest magnet in the world. The car stopped 10 feet from the circle. Engine died, lights went out, and in the darkness, the flowers began to move. Not wind, there was no wind. They were moving on their own, turning, all of them. Thousands of white faces turning toward my car, and I realized they weren't flowers at all. They were eyes, ancient eyes, growing from the desert floor, blinking in unison, watching, remembering. I tried to start the car. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. The key turned, but the engine was dead. Completely dead. Like it had never run at all. A knock on my window. Soft, polite. A man stood there, young, maybe 30, wearing jeans and a Phoenix Suns t-shirt. Normal. Completely normal. Except his eyes were white. Like the woman's. Like the flowers. And his skin had a waxy quality. Like he'd been carved from soap. "It's time to join the garden," he said. His voice was my voice. Exactly my voice. Every inflection, every accent, perfect mimicry. I locked the doors, stupid, useless, but I locked them anyway. More knocks, all around the car now. I was surrounded. People, dozens of them, all young, all with white eyes, all speaking with my voice. But not just my voice, my words, things I'd said, conversations I'd had, private thoughts I'd never shared. Join the garden. That was from my interview 3 months ago. The exact tone I'd used when asking to join the company. Feed the flowers. My voice from a nature documentary I'd watched last week, commenting on pollination. 77 miles. My GPS voice. The mechanical cadence I used when giving directions. They remember. My whisper from 2 nights ago, telling my girlfriend about a dream I'd had. A nightmare about white flowers and empty roads. I closed my eyes, pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear them inside my head now. Not just my voice, my thoughts, my memories, everything I'd ever experienced. All of it spoken back to me in perfect detail. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to say. She was from Tucson. Full-blooded Tohono O'odham. She used to tell me stories about the desert, about the things that lived there before humans, before anything. The desert keeps its own, she'd say, but it can't keep what doesn't belong. I opened my eyes, grabbed my water bottle, the one from the gas station still sealed. I twisted it open and poured it in a circle on my dashboard. Water. The one thing the desert always wants. Always needs. I don't belong here, I said out loud. I'm just passing through. I don't belong to you. The knocking stopped. I poured more water on the seats, on the floor, wasting it, giving it to the desert. Take this instead. It's all I have. Take it and let me go. Silence, then laughter. Not from the people outside, from the flowers, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. Like children giggling in an empty house, like music played on instruments made of teeth and tears. But something else happened. The water I'd poured began to glow. Soft blue light, natural light, real light, and where it touched, the artificial perfection of my car's interior began to crack. The too new upholstery aged. The pristine dashboard grew dust. Reality reasserted itself. My engine started. By itself, headlights blazed to life, illuminating the circle of people. But they weren't people anymore. They were empty spaces, person-shaped holes in the air, and through them, I could see the truth. The garden wasn't made of flowers. It was made of souls, every person who'd ever died in this desert, every traveler who'd gotten lost, every pioneer, every native, every animal, all of them, growing from the sand, feeding something underneath, something vast, something that had been here since the world was young. But more than that, the garden was a mouth, a vast mouth in the earth, and we, all of us who took the wrong road, who followed the detour, we were food, memories to be consumed, experiences to be digested, lives to be absorbed into something that had forgotten what it meant to be human. The car moved on its own, backward, away from the garden, but not away from danger. I could feel it, something following, something vast and patient and hungry. The empty people followed for a while, walking through the desert, fading with each step until they were just heat shimmer. Then nothing, but the flowers. The flowers came with me. They bloomed along the roadside as I drove, sprouting from sand and stone, growing at impossible speed. A trail of white eyes marking my passage, remembering me, tracking me. The road was different going back, older, cracked, real. The crosses were gone, the town was gone, just desert. Miles and miles of proper Sonoran desert. Beautiful in its honesty, terrible in its truth. But I wasn't alone. In my rearview mirror, always in my rearview mirror, I could see it, a white line stretching across the desert, following the road I'd taken, a scar of flowers, a wound in the world that bled memory. My phone buzzed, came back to life. 3:17 a.m. 14 missed calls, all from my roommate. I'd been gone for 6 hours. It had felt like minutes or days. Time doesn't work right in places like that. The GPS showed I was on Highway 79, right where the construction should have been. But there was no construction, no signs, no State Route 238A. Nothing, just the main highway stretching toward Phoenix like it always had. I called my roommate, Mike. Good guy. Worried about me. Jesus, David, where have you been? I've been calling for hours. I got lost, I said. Took a detour. Road was closed. What road? I drove 79 twice today. No construction anywhere. There was construction. Orange cones, signs. A detour to... But I couldn't say it. The name wouldn't come. Like my tongue refused to form the syllables. Noche flores, night flowers. But all that came out was static, verbal white noise. David? You're breaking up. Are you okay? Was I okay? I looked at myself in the mirror. Still me. Still 27, still normal. But my eyes, there were flecks in my eyes that hadn't been there before. White flecks, like tiny flowers blooming in my iris. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired. I'll be home soon. I made it to Phoenix as the sun came up. Pulled into my apartment complex. Sat in my car for an hour, trying to make sense of it. Trying to convince myself it was a dream. Exhaustion, hallucination, stress from work, too much caffeine, not enough sleep. But then I saw it. In my rearview mirror, stuck under my windshield wiper, a white flower. Real. Physical. Beautiful. I got out, walked around the car, reached for it. And it opened, not like a flower blooming, like an eye. White iris, white pupil, looking at me, seeing me, remembering me. I left it there, drove to a car wash, told them to clean everything. They found 7 more, under the bumper, in the wheel wells. One somehow inside my gas cap, growing from the metal itself. Roots of white threading through my car's engine. The kid working there asked if I wanted to keep them, said they were pretty, said his girlfriend would love them. I told him no, told him to burn them. He laughed, thought I was joking. I wasn't joking. That was 3 weeks ago. And every night since, I dream about that place, about the garden, about the empty people speaking with my voice. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that I can feel them. The flowers growing somewhere, getting closer. Not just growing toward me, growing from me. Last night, I found one in my bathroom, growing from the drain, white petals pushing through the metal grating like fingers. When I touched it, I remembered things that weren't my memories. A woman driving alone, Maria Sandoval, her last moments, her confusion as her car stopped responding, her terror as the empty people surrounded her vehicle. Tonight, there's one outside my window. 3rd floor apartment. Nothing to climb on, but there it is, pressed against the glass, watching me type these words. I think I understand now. The garden doesn't just feed on people, it feeds on their stories, their experiences, everything they've ever seen or done or felt. And once it tastes you, once it gets even the smallest piece, it wants the rest. The flowers are messengers, scouts. They carry pieces of the garden into the world, spreading, searching, looking for the right soil, the right circumstances, the right memories to harvest. And I've been marked. Each night, more flowers. More memories that aren't mine. More pieces of other people's lives blooming in my apartment. In my dreams. In my thoughts. I see Roberto Martinez working late at his construction job. Feel his exhaustion. his desire to get home to his family. I experience Ashley Chen's road trip, her excitement about starting college, her plans for the future. I live Jason Park's final moments. His confusion as the road changed around him, his disbelief as his car joined the circle. They're all here, all of them, living in my head, sharing my space. And every night there are more. The pattern is becoming clear. 7 people, 7 souls, 7 memories to complete the harvest. And then the garden can bloom somewhere new, somewhere with more travelers, more stories, more lives to consume. Phoenix is perfect, millions of people, thousands of roads, countless stories waiting to be harvested. But first, it needs its 7th soul, its final memory, the one that ties all the others together. Me. If you're still listening, if you made it this far, I need you to do something for me. Share this story, tell others. Not because I want views or subscribers or any of that worthless noise, but because people need to know. Stay on the main roads. Never take a detour through the desert at night. And if you ever see white flowers growing where they shouldn't be, growing in perfect circles around dead things, don't stop. Don't even slow down, because the desert never forgets. And some gardens feed on more than water and sun. Some gardens feed on memory itself. And once they remember you, once they really remember you, you become part of the bloom. There's someone knocking at my door at 3 a.m., knocking with my rhythm, speaking with my voice. The white flowers are spreading across my ceiling now, opening like eyes, watching, waiting. I think my 77 miles are up. Don't let yours start. Tell me. Have you ever noticed flowers growing where they shouldn't? Have you ever taken a road that wasn't on any map? Are you lying in bed right now? Safe and warm? Absolutely certain that rustling sound outside your window is just the wind. Drop a comment below. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me you've seen them too. Because if I'm the only one who knows, if I'm the only one who remembers, then maybe I really am just fertilizer for next season's bloom. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe becoming part of something eternal, something that remembers everything. Maybe that's better than being forgotten. The flowers are beautiful when you really look at them. Perfect, pure, eternal. Maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to bloom. Sweet dreams, if you can still have them after this. Author's note. If you've read this far, you might be wondering if any of this is true. If State Route 238A really exists. If Noche Flores is a real place. If there's actually a garden of white flowers 77 miles from Phoenix. I can't answer that. But I can tell you this. Be careful what detours you take. Be careful what roads you follow when your GPS dies and the construction signs appear. And if you ever find white flowers where they shouldn't be, remember that some stories are warnings, and some warnings come too late. Story number 2. The receipt was dated tomorrow. I stood there in the parking lot of Secure Store Self-Storage in Bakersfield, California, staring at that little slip of paper until my eyes watered. October 15th, 2025. Tomorrow's date. The ink was fresh, still slightly smudged where my thumb had pressed against it. But that was impossible. Today was October 14th, 2025. I checked my phone 3 times to make sure. The elderly woman behind the counter had handed it to me with trembling fingers, her clouded eyes not quite meeting mine. Unit 1999, she'd whispered, like she was afraid someone might hear. Been paid up for 26 years now, never been opened. Your uncle, he said you'd come for it today. My Uncle Pete had been dead for 3 months. Before you think I'm crazy, before you click away, let me ask you something. Have you ever inherited something that felt wrong the moment you touched it? Something that made your skin crawl even though it looked perfectly normal? That's what holding that key felt like. Cold metal that seemed to pulse against my palm like it had its own heartbeat. If you're still listening, good. Because what I found in that storage unit changed everything I thought I knew about time, about reality, and about why my uncle really died. So get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket, but keep the lights on, trust me on that one. This is where the story begins. The drive to Secure Store that morning had been normal enough. Interstate 5 stretched ahead of me. Heat waves rising from the asphalt even though October in California isn't supposed to be this hot anymore. My Honda Civic's air conditioning wheezed like an asthmatic grandmother, and I'd been thinking about nothing more mysterious than whether I could afford to get it fixed. Uncle Pete's lawyer had called the week before. Said there was something in the will I needed to handle personally. Not money. God, I wish it had been money. Just a storage unit he'd been paying for since 1999. 1999? I'd asked, doing the math. He's been paying for storage for 26 years. Every month, the lawyer confirmed. Automatic payments, never missed one. The instructions were very specific. You inherited exactly 3 months after his passing. Not a day before, not a day after. Pete had always been the weird uncle. You know the type. Showed up to Thanksgiving dinner with conspiracy theories instead of pie, always checking his watch like he was late for something that hadn't happened yet. But he'd also been kind. Slipped me $20 bills when Mom wasn't looking, taught me how to change a tire, told me stories about parallel universes that made me laugh even when I was too old for fairy tales. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of town, where Bakersfield starts to fade into dusty nothing. Chain-link fence, security cameras that probably hadn't worked since Bush was president. The first Bush. And rows upon rows of orange doors that looked like they were guarding secrets nobody wanted to find. The old woman at the desk had been expecting me. That should have been my first real warning. "Sarah Chen?" she asked before I'd even opened my mouth. I nodded, something cold sliding down my spine despite the October heat. She'd pulled out a manila envelope that looked older than I was, my name written on it in Uncle Pete's shaky handwriting. Inside, the key, the receipt, and a note. "Sarah, I'm sorry for what you're about to find. Remember what I always told you. Time isn't a river flowing in one direction. Sometimes it's more like a lake. And sometimes things wash up on shores they were never meant to reach. Be careful. Trust your instincts. And whatever you do, don't take anything home with you. Pete." "Units in the back row," the woman said, still not meeting my eyes. "Building C, last one on the left." The walk to Building C felt longer than it should have. My sneakers crunched on gravel that seemed too loud, echoing between the storage units like whispers. The numbers counted up as I walked. 1995, 1996, 1997, 1998. Unit 1999 had a brand new lock on it. Not the rusty padlock I'd expected on something unopened for decades. This one was electronic, with a small keypad that shouldn't have existed in 1999. The key I held wasn't a key at all. It was a key card, modern, sleek, with a magnetic strip that caught the sunlight. My hands shook as I swiped it. The lock beeped, a green light flashed. The door clicked open. The smell hit me first. Not musty or old like you'd expect. It smelled like ozone, like the air right before a thunderstorm, like electricity dancing on your tongue. I pulled the door up, its metal rails squealing in protest, and stepped inside. The storage unit was bigger than it looked from outside, much bigger. The walls stretched back into shadows. My phone's flashlight couldn't quite reach, and the ceiling. I couldn't see the ceiling at all. Just darkness that seemed to swallow light. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the stuff. Newspapers were stacked along the left wall, hundreds of them. I picked up the one on top and my legs nearly gave out. The Bakersfield Californian, dated October 16th, 2025. Tomorrow. The day after tomorrow. Headlines about an earthquake that hadn't happened yet. Election results for races that weren't decided. An obituary section that made my stomach turn because I recognized some of the names. I dropped it like it was burning my fingers. In the corner sat a laptop. Not an old one from 1999. This was newer than anything in stores right now. The logo on the back was Apple, but the design was different. Thinner, almost transparent. When I touched the trackpad, it hummed to life without being plugged in, showing a desktop with files dated 2026, 2027, 2028. One folder was labeled Sarah. I didn't open it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to know. There were other things, too. A smartphone that made my iPhone look like a brick, its screen showing missed calls from numbers that didn't exist yet. A winter coat with a receipt from REI dated December 2025, my size, with a note attached. You'll need this. Books that hadn't been written yet. Photo albums filled with pictures of people I recognized looking older than they should. My mom with gray hair she didn't have yet. My best friend Kelly holding a baby that looked just like her, even though she swore she never wanted kids. And in the back, covered by a tarp that felt weird to touch, like static electricity made solid, was a mirror. I know what you're thinking. A mirror, so what? But this mirror. When I looked into it, I didn't see myself. Not exactly. I saw myself, but older. Maybe by a year, maybe 2. Same black hair, but longer, a scar on my chin I didn't have, wearing clothes I didn't own. And behind me in the reflection, the storage unit looked different, emptier, like someone had already taken things out. The me in the mirror mouthed words I couldn't hear. Her eyes were wide, panicked. She was trying to warn me about something. Then my phone rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe accept. Sarah? The voice was familiar but wrong, older, tired. Sarah, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Who is this? A pause, then, Sarah, it's me. It's you. I'm you from next year. And you need to listen very carefully. I dropped the phone. Actually, dropped it. Heard it clatter on the concrete floor, the voice still talking from the speaker. My hands were shaking too hard to hold anything. Sarah, please pick up the phone. We don't have much time. The voice, it really did sound like me. Like me with a cold, maybe, or me after crying for hours. Rough around the edges, exhausted, but definitely my voice. I picked up the phone with numb fingers. This isn't real, I whispered. I know how it sounds. The voice, my voice, said, I remember this call. I remember being where you are right now, thinking I was losing my mind, but Sarah, you need to listen. The storage unit, Uncle Pete set it up to warn us, to warn you. Warn me about what? December 3rd, 2025, 7 weeks from now. Whatever you do, you can't be in Bakersfield on December 3rd, promise me. I don't understand. The earthquake, the one in tomorrow's newspaper. It's real, but it's just the beginning. December 3rd is when everything changes. When the ground doesn't just shake, it tears, reality tears. I looked at the newspapers stacked against the wall. My mouth felt like sandpaper. You're saying you're calling from the future? 1 year, 2 months, and 4 days from where you're standing. And I'm not the only one who's called. Check the phone in the storage unit, the smartphone. Check the voicemails. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone I'd noticed earlier. It was impossibly light, the screen responding to my touch before my finger even made contact. 17 voicemails, all from the same number, all from different dates in 2026. I played the first one. Sarah, it's January 2026. You didn't listen. You stayed in Bakersfield. Mom's gone. Kelly's gone. We're the only one left, and it's our fault. The second one, March 2026. The tiers are getting bigger. People are finding things that shouldn't exist. Things from other timelines, other possibilities. The government's trying to contain it, but... The third, June 2026. Don't trust David Marshall. You'll meet him at Kelly's Halloween party. He seems nice, but he's a part of what causes December 3rd. Stay away from him. I stopped listening. My head was spinning, and the storage unit suddenly felt too small, like the walls were pressing in. "This is insane," I said to the Emmy on my current phone. "I know, but look at the laptop, look at the folder marked evidence. Everything's there. Stock prices for the next year, sports outcomes, political events, things you can verify as they happen. Uncle Pete collected it all. He knew this was coming. How? Because he lived through it once already, in his timeline, the original timeline. December 3rd happened in 1999. That's why he got the storage unit. He's been trying to prevent it from happening again, but time keeps circling back. Like he always said, it's not a river. I walked back to the laptop, opened the folder marked Evidence. Screenshots of news websites, stock market data, a file labeled World Series 2025 showing the Texas Rangers winning in 6 games, another showing lottery numbers for November. Why didn't he just tell me, I asked. Would you have believed him? Would anyone? He tried, Sarah. The week before he died, he tried to tell you something important. Remember? I did remember. He'd shown up at my apartment, agitated, talking about probabilities and fractures and how some things echo backward through time. I'd thought it was his dementia getting worse. I'd made him tea and called Mom to pick him up. The things in this storage unit, future me continued, they're bleeding through from timelines where December 3rd already happened, where we failed to stop it. Each timeline leaves something behind, trying to warn the next one. So, what do I do? First, take the coat. You really will need it. Take the laptop too, but nothing else. The other items, they're too dangerous. They're too connected to timelines that shouldn't exist. And Sarah? Yeah? In 3 days, you're going to get a job offer from Milestone Marketing in San Francisco. Take it. It gets you out of Bakersfield. Away from ground zero. How do you know I'll get the offer? Because I lived it. Because I'm living it. Because... She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. Because time isn't linear, and every choice we make creates ripples that flow both forward and backward. Uncle Pete understood that. He spent 26 years preparing this moment, making sure you'd be here right now, getting this warning. The laptop screen flickered, showing a new file I hadn't noticed before. For Sarah, urgent. Open it, future me said. The file was a video. Uncle Pete, but not the Uncle Pete I remembered from 3 months ago. This version looked younger, healthier. The timestamp showed September 30th, 2025, 2 weeks ago, but Pete looked like he did in photos from the early 2000s. Sarah, he said, staring directly into the camera. If you're watching this, then the loop is starting again, and I'm already gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. Every time I tried, every time I got close to explaining, I'd forget. Something would make me forget. The timeline protecting itself maybe, or maybe just an old man's failing mind. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. He held up a photograph. It was me, but older, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, holding a degree from a university I'd never attended. This is you from timeline 47B, he said. The one where December 3rd never happened, where the ground never tore. You became a teacher, married someone named Alex, had 2 kids and a dog named Schrodinger. You always did love physics jokes in that timeline. He set the photo down, picked up another. This one showed a destroyed cityscape, buildings tilted at impossible angles, the sky the wrong color, purple-green like a bruise. This is Bakersfield, timeline 12A, December 4th, 2025, the day after the tear, Population before, 380,000. Population after, 1,347. The survivors said reality became flexible. Past, present, and future all existing in the same space. People aging and dying and being born all at once. Buildings that were demolished decades ago appearing solid, while new constructions phased in and out of existence. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone steady. But here's the thing, Sarah, Pete continued. It's not inevitable. Each loop, each timeline, we get a little closer to preventing it. Little changes, little warnings. They add up. The storage unit is my contribution. Every loop, I add something new. Something from a timeline where we got closer to stopping it. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. David Marshall works for a company called Temporal Solutions. They think they're developing quantum computing, but they're actually weakening the barriers between timelines. On December 3rd, they're going to run a test. Protocol 7, they call it. The earthquake tomorrow, that's from them, a small test. A crack that they'll spend 7 weeks widening until reality just snaps. The video paused, buffered, then continued. Yeah, you can stop it, Sarah. In timeline 31C, you did. You took the job in San Francisco, but you didn't run. You came back on December 2nd with evidence, got the facility shut down, saved everyone, but then... He shook his head. Then January happened differently. The tear came from another angle. So, in timeline 32A, you tried something else. Turn it off, future me said through the phone. You don't need to see all of it. Just know that we keep trying. Every version of us keeps trying. I paused the video. Why me? Why is it always me? I don't know. Maybe because Uncle Pete prepared us. Maybe because we're, I don't know, some kind of quantum constant. A fixed point that exists in every timeline. Or maybe it's just random, and we're the ones who keep choosing to fight. I looked around the storage unit. At the newspapers from tomorrow. At the laptop from next year. At the mirror showing me a future I might never reach. The job offer, I said. Milestone marketing. Should I really take it? It's your choice. It's always been your choice. That's what Uncle Pete never understood. He kept trying to force the timeline, to make things happen exactly right. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe the solution isn't following a script from a future that already failed. I picked up the coat, ran my fingers over the fabric. It felt real, solid. A little too warm for October, but winter was coming. What did you choose? I asked, future me. When you were standing where I am? A long pause. I took everything, every item in the storage unit. I thought more information would help, but the weight of all those timelines, all those possibilities, it drove me a little crazy. I made mistakes, trusted the wrong people because I'd seen timelines where they were heroes, avoided the right people because I'd seen timelines where they were villains. So, what should I do? What feels right? Trust your instincts, not the echoes from failed futures. And Sarah? Yeah? The scar on your chin. The one you saw in the mirror, you get it saving someone. December 2nd, a kid at a coffee shop when the pre-shocks start. You could avoid that coffee shop, prevent the scar, but then the kid... I get it, I said quietly. I have to go, future me said. The calls between timelines. They don't last long. The connection's already degrading. But Sarah, remember, time isn't a river. It's not a lake either. It's more like... Static cut across the line, her voice fragmenting. Like what? I asked desperately. Through the static, I barely heard her answer. Like a choice being made over and over again. The line went dead. I stood in the storage unit for a long time, surrounded by impossible things. Finally, I picked up the coat and the laptop, left everything else. As I was about to close the door, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small notebook tucked behind the newspapers. My name wasn't on it, but I recognized Pete's handwriting on the cover. Loop 48, New Variables. I opened it to the first page. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means you didn't follow the script. Good. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. Maybe the key isn't preventing December 3rd. Maybe it's surviving it differently. The tear, in reality, what if it's not a wound? What if it's supposed to happen? What if we're preventing a natural process, and that's why it keeps getting worse? Think about it. Pete, Loop, 47. I tucked the notebook into the coat pocket, locked the storage unit, and walked back to my car. The elderly woman at the front desk was gone. The office was empty, dust motes floating in the afternoon sun like the place had been abandoned for years. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of the receipt again. Still dated tomorrow. October 15th, 2025. Tomorrow, the earthquake would hit. Small, according to the newspapers. Just a warning. 7 weeks after that, December 3rd would come. And somewhere, in another timeline, another version of me was already living through the aftermath, leaving messages in storage units and voicemails on phones that shouldn't exist, trying to warn the next iteration. But maybe future me was right. Maybe the answer wasn't in the warnings from failed timelines. Maybe it was in making a choice that no other version had made before. I pulled over at a Starbucks, opened the laptop, and started researching temporal solutions. If they were the cause, maybe the solution wasn't running or hiding or even stopping them. Maybe it was helping them do it right. The laptop had a file I hadn't noticed before. Timeline 48A, Hypothesis. I opened it. One line of text. What if the tear is trying to heal something that's already broken? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The coffee shop is called Rosie's Cafe, December 2nd, 3:47 p.m. The kid is wearing a red jacket. I looked at the timestamp on the message. It was dated October 14th, 2026. 1 year in the future, or maybe the past, or maybe both, happening at the same time, echoing back and forth in a loop that someone, somewhere kept trying to break. I started the car, turned not toward San Francisco but toward home, toward Bakersfield, toward December 3rd. Because maybe the only way to break a loop is to stop running from it. The drive home took forever, and no time at all. I kept checking the clock on my dashboard, watching the numbers flicker like they couldn't decide what time it was supposed to be. 4:17 p.m. became 4:03 p.m., became 4:23 p.m. Even time itself seemed uncertain now, like Uncle Pete's storage unit had infected my car with temporal hiccups. The laptop sat in my passenger seat, warm to the touch even though it wasn't plugged in. Every few minutes, I heard it chime with a new notification. Messages arriving from dates that hadn't happened yet. Part of me wanted to pull over and read them all, to absorb every scrap of information from every failed timeline. But future me's words echoed in my head. Trust your instincts, not the echoes from failed futures. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, the parking lot looked wrong. Not dramatically different, but off. The blue Honda that usually parked in Space 23 was red now. The oak tree by the mailboxes had yellow leaves instead of green, even though it was still October. Small things. Things only someone looking for temporal anomalies would notice. The earthquake was already starting to affect things. Reality was softening around the edges, letting details from other timelines bleed through. Inside my apartment, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. The laptop, the coat, Pete's notebook, the receipt that still insisted tomorrow was today. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to process what I'd learned. 47 previous loops. 47 versions of me who had stood in that storage unit and made choices. Some ran to San Francisco, some stayed to fight, some tried to warn the authorities. Some attempted to destroy temporal solutions. All had failed, or I wouldn't be here now, reading their warnings. The notebook was full of Pete's observations from multiple timelines. His handwriting changed throughout, sometimes steady and clear, sometimes erratic and desperate. On page 17, he'd written, "Loop 23, Sarah joined them. Became part of the experiment. The tear happened anyway, but smaller. Only killed half the city instead of all of it. Progress? On page 31, Loop 34, tried to kill David Marshall before he could run Protocol 7. Sarah succeeded. Someone else ran the test instead. Note, it's not about one person. It's about the process itself. The timeline wants this to happen. The most disturbing entry was near the end. Loop 46. Sarah never found the storage unit. I died before I could set it up properly. December 3rd proceeded without any warnings. Complete temporal collapse. Reality became unwritten. Had to restart from loop 1. Some things are worse than failure. I closed the notebook, my hands trembling. The weight of all those failed attempts pressed down on me like gravity from a dozen different timelines. How many times had I lived this day? How many times had I made the wrong choice? My phone rang. Not the future me number this time. This one I recognized. "Hey, Kelly," I answered, trying to sound normal. "Sarah?" Perfect timing. "I wanted to ask you about Halloween. We're having a party on the 31st, and I wanted to make sure you could come. There's this guy from work I want you to meet. David Marshall. He's new in town. Really sweet." The phone slipped from my fingers. I caught it just before it hit the floor. "Sarah? You still there?" "Yeah," I managed. "Yeah, I'm here. About David." "Oh, you've heard of him?" "He works for some tech company. Temporal Solutions, I think. Anyway, he just moved here from Silicon Valley and doesn't know anyone. I thought you two might hit it off." The room spun. Kelly was already planning to introduce me to the man who would destroy reality. In other timelines, I'd probably met him differently, but the result was always the same. He was part of the pattern, part of the process that led to December 3rd. "Sarah? Did I lose you?" "I'm here," I said. "Kelly, about the party. Maybe I can't make it." "What? But you love Halloween, and you haven't been out since your uncle died. I think Pete would want you to." She kept talking, but her words faded into background noise. Because sitting on my kitchen table, the laptop screen had lit up by itself. A new message had appeared, time-stamped 3 minutes in the future. From S. Chen, timeline 49 at temporalmail.net. To Sarah Chen, current at reality.now. Subject, don't avoid the party. Sarah, I know what you're thinking. Stay away from David. Avoid Halloween. Break the pattern. I thought the same thing in timeline 49. But when I didn't show up to Kelly's party, David met someone else instead. Jennifer Martinez from the accounting department. She became his confidant, his emotional anchor during the stress of Protocol 7. Without me there to provide a different influence, he proceeded with the test exactly as scheduled. The party isn't where you meet David. It's where you have the chance to change him. Sarah, timeline 49. P.S. Check the coat pocket. Left side. There's something I put there that Uncle Pete never mentioned. With numb fingers, I reached into the coat's left pocket. My hand closed around something cold and metal. I pulled it out and nearly dropped it. It was a wedding ring, simple gold band but engraved on the inside, "To Sarah, love always." Alex, the name Uncle Pete had mentioned. The person I'd married in timeline 47B, the one where December 3rd never happened. But how could future me have put this in the coat? The storage unit was Uncle Pete's creation, filled with objects from multiple timelines. Unless I looked at the ring more closely. It wasn't just from timeline 47B, inscribed on the outside, in letters so small I could barely read them, were coordinates, and a date, December 3rd, 2025. The engagement ring was also a message, a location, a time, where I needed to be when Protocol 7 began. Not running from Bakersfield, not hiding in San Francisco, but standing at those exact coordinates when reality tore open, wearing the wedding ring from a timeline where love had conquered chaos. "Sarah?" Kelly's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you okay? You've been quiet for like 5 minutes." I looked at the ring, at the laptop showing messages from futures that might never exist, at Uncle Pete's notebook full of failed attempts. "Kelly," I said, "about the Halloween party, I'll be there. And I definitely want to meet David. Because maybe the secret wasn't changing the timeline. Maybe it was changing the person who broke it." The laptop chimed again. Another message, this one from a timestamp I recognized. October 14th, 2025. Today. But sent 3 hours ago, before I'd ever gone to the storage unit. From pete.chen.original@timeline.source to sarah.current@loop.48. Subject, one more secret. Sarah, if you're reading this, then you found everything I left for you. But there's one thing I never told any version of you because I was never certain until now. The tears in reality? They're not accidents. They're not the result of temporal solutions experiments gone wrong. They're scars. Someone, something, has been trying to break into our reality for decades. The experiments don't cause the tears, they just make them visible. Weak points where this entity has been pressing against the barriers between worlds. December 3rd isn't when reality breaks, it's when something finally breaks through. And Sarah, I think it's been waiting specifically for you. Uncle Pete, First Loop, 1999. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Outside my window, the streetlights flickered on even though it was still daylight. The blue Honda in Space 23 was yellow now, and in the distance I could swear I heard thunder, even though the sky was clear. The earthquake was coming tomorrow. The job offer from San Francisco would arrive in 3 days. Halloween was 2 weeks away, and in 7 weeks, something was going to claw its way through the barriers of reality, using the tears we'd inadvertently created as doorways, unless Loop 48 finally got it right. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, like it had always belonged there, like somewhere, in another timeline. It already did. Time to meet David Marshall. Story number 3. The elevator buttons at the MGM Grand go from 2011 to 2013. That's not a mistake. That's not poor planning. That's intentional. And if you're listening to this right now, lying in your bed, maybe with the lights dimmed low, you need to know why. Because what happened to me last month in Vegas might happen to you. And trust me, you'll want to be prepared. Before I tell you this story, hit that subscribe button. Not because I'm asking, but because you're going to need to know what happens next. And leave a comment telling me, have you ever noticed missing floor numbers in hotels? Because after you hear this, you'll never ignore them again. Now, the story begins. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a sound engineer from Los Angeles. Not the glamorous kind who works with rock stars. The boring kind who fixes audio systems in conference centers and hotels. Last month, the MGM Grand called me about a problem. Not an emergency, they said, just unusual. We need someone discreet, the facilities manager told me over the phone. Her name was Janet, and she sounded tired, like she'd been explaining this to too many people. Can you be here Thursday night? Thursday night, not Thursday morning, not Friday afternoon. Thursday night, specifically at 11 p.m. I should have asked more questions, but the pay was triple my usual rate, and Vegas in October meant perfect weather and maybe a few hands of blackjack after the job. So I packed my equipment, my spectrum analyzer, my recording gear, my laptop, and drove out through the Mojave Desert. The MGM Grand at night is something else. Those emerald lights pierce through the desert darkness like something alive. I'd been there before for conventions, but never noticed how the building seemed to hum. Not mechanically, but almost musically, a low thrumming that you felt more than heard. Janet met me in the lobby. She was maybe 50, graying hair pulled back tight, wearing a blazer that had seen too many late nights. She didn't shake my hand, just nodded toward the service elevators. "I need to explain something before we go up," she said, leading me past the casino floor. The slots were singing their electronic songs, but even they seemed muted, like someone had thrown a blanket over all that artificial joy. "The sound you're going to investigate, it's not coming from any of our systems." I stopped walking. "Then why am I here?" She turned, and for the first time, I saw how exhausted she really looked. Dark circles under her eyes. Hands that trembled slightly as she pulled out her keycard. "Because the sound is real, Mr. Chen. Guests on the 20th floor have been complaining for 3 weeks, but here's the thing." She paused, swiping her card at a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "The sound is coming from Suite 2012. "Okay, so check the suites. There is no Suite 2012. The service hallway stretched before us, fluorescent lights flickering occasionally. Our footsteps echoed wrong, like the space was bigger than it looked. "The elevator skips it," she continued. "Goes straight from the button for floor 20, room 2011, to room 2013. Has since the day this tower was built in 1993. But people hear music coming from where 2012 should be. Music that, well, you'll understand when you hear it." We reached a service elevator, smaller than the guest ones, with that industrial smell of oil and metal. Janet pressed the button for 20, then pulled out a second keycard, this one older, with worn edges. "This opens the maintenance panel," she said. "Behind it, there's a button. An old one. It'll take you to the space where 2012 would be. Should be, geometrically speaking. But the elevator started rising. My ears popped around floor 15. "But what?" I asked. "But when we send maintenance up there, they come back different. Not hurt, not injured, just different, quieter. Like they've heard something they can't quite remember, but can't quite forget either." The elevator slowed, floor 20. "I'm not going with you," Janet said as the doors opened. "I'll be in the security office watching the cameras." Though she hesitated. "The cameras don't work properly on that section. They record, but the footage always comes out strange." The 20th floor hallway stretched in both directions. Plush carpet, Art Deco wallpaper, doors numbered in gold. I could see 2011 to my left, 2013 to my right. And between them was a space that shouldn't exist. Not a wall, not a door, just space. Like your eyes wanted to skip over it, move from 2011 directly to 2013. But if you focused, really focused, you could see it. A section of hallway that was there, but wasn't existing in the corner of your vision. "The button's in the maintenance panel," Janet said again, stepping back into the elevator. "Press it once. The whatever it is will appear. A door, usually. Sometimes just an opening. Go in, find the source of the music, document it. That's all we need." The elevator doors started closing. "Wait," I called out. "What kind of music?" She looked at me through the narrowing gap between the doors. "Jazz," she said. "But not normal jazz. It's jazz that sounds like it's being played by someone who learned music from a dream. Someone who understands the notes, but not what makes them human." The doors closed. I stood alone in the hallway. The carpet seemed to breathe under my feet. That thick Vegas hotel carpet that swallows sound. From somewhere, Maybe from that space between 2011 and 2013. I could hear it. Music. Faint, like it was coming through water. Or time. Or something else that muffles sound in ways air shouldn't. I found the maintenance panel. The keycard worked on the first try, which surprised me. In my experience, nothing in hotels works on the first try. Behind the panel was a button. Old brass, tarnished green around the edges. No label, no number. I set down my equipment bag and pulled out my recorder. The levels were already jumping, picking up something in the sub-bass range. Something rhythmic, something that matched the music I could almost hear. I pressed record, then I pressed the button. The hallway didn't change. Not exactly. It's more like it remembered something it had been trying to forget. The space between 2011 and 2013 shimmered, like heat waves off desert asphalt. And then there was a door, room 2012. The numbers were gold, same as the others, but the gold looked wet, fresh, like it had just been painted and would smear if you touched it. The door itself was wrong too, older than the others, with that heavy wooden quality hotels used in the 70s, before keycards, before electronic locks. There was a brass doorknob. The music was clearer now, definitely jazz. A saxophone leading, piano following, drums keeping time. But Janet was right. The rhythm was off. Not bad, just alien. Like someone had learned jazz by description alone, never having heard human emotion in it. I checked my recorder. The levels were going crazy, but not from volume, from frequency. The music was hitting ranges that shouldn't exist, notes between notes, harmonies that made my teeth ache. I touched the doorknob, cold, so cold it burned, but it turned easily, too easily, like it had been waiting. The door opened inward. The suite beyond was impossible, not because it was supernatural or obviously wrong, but because it was too perfect. It was every hotel suite you've ever stayed in, all at once. The furniture was from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, all existing simultaneously. A geometric pattern carpet that shifted styles as you looked at it. Wallpaper that was wood paneling that was painted drywall that was silk fabric. And in the center of the main room, a small stage. 3 figures played there. I say figures because I can't quite remember their faces. Even now, trying to recall, it's like trying to remember a dream. They wore tuxedos, or maybe they were tuxedos. Their instruments gleamed gold and silver and brass, but the shine kept moving, sliding across the surfaces like mercury. The saxophone player noticed me first. It turned. They turned, and the music shifted, became more inviting, more human. Almost. "You're early," the piano player said without stopping playing. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, male and female, and neither. "The show doesn't start until midnight." I looked at my phone. 11:27 p.m. "I'm here about the noise complaints," I managed to say. My mouth was dry. The air in the suite tasted like copper pennies and old champagne. The drummer laughed. The sound was like ice cracking. Noise. This is music. Music that was, music that is, music that will be. We're practicing for the grand opening. "The hotel opened in 1993, I said. "No," the saxophone player corrected, the instrument still at their lips, somehow speaking through the music. "The hotel opens every night. For those who need to find it, those who need to hear." I stepped fully into the suite. The door swung shut behind me. Not slammed, just closed with the soft certainty of inevitability. My recorder was still running, the digital display showing impossible numbers. Negative decibels, frequencies in the millions of hertz. The room had windows. floor-to-ceiling windows that should have looked out over the Vegas Strip. But the view was wrong. It was Vegas, yes, but Vegas from when? The Sands was there, demolished in 1996. The Stardust, gone in 2007. The old Desert Inn. But also buildings I didn't recognize. Towers of glass that didn't exist yet, or maybe never would. Sit, the piano player suggested. Listen, you came here to understand the music, didn't you? There was a chair, high-backed, velvet, the kind they had in old jazz clubs. I didn't remember seeing it before, but there it was, positioned perfectly to view the stage. I sat. What else could I do? The music changed, became more complex. The saxophone wept notes that told stories of every lonely traveler who'd ever come to Vegas. The piano played the sound of dice hitting felt, cards being dealt, hearts being broken. The drums beat with the rhythm of 1,000 slot machines, 1,000,000 footsteps on casino floors. "We've been here since the beginning," the drummer said, never missing a beat. "Before the hotel, before the city, before the desert learned to dream of neon. We're the music that calls people to Vegas. The song that says, take a chance, roll the dice, become someone new. I wanted to leave. Every instinct told me to run. But the music held me like gentle chains." "What are you?" I asked. The three figures looked at each other, smiled. At least I think they smiled. "We're the house band," they said in unison. "Every casino has one, usually metaphorical, but here in this place that officially doesn't exist, we can be literal, we can be real." The saxophone player stepped forward. Up close, I could see their face was not a face. It was the idea of a face, features that suggested themselves without actually being there. "The question is," they said, "what are you?" "A sound engineer, yes. But what else? What did you come to Vegas to find? Not just money. Everyone says money, but it's never just that." I thought about lying, but in that room, with that music filling every molecule of air, lies seemed impossible. "I came to forget," I admitted. "My ex-wife, the divorce, the way everything fell apart when I stopped hearing the music in ordinary life." The three figures nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Then you understand," the piano player said. "Music isn't just sound. It's time. It's memory. It's possibility. And in Vegas, in this city built on chance and change, music can be even more." The clock on the wall, a clock I hadn't noticed before, Art Deco with hands that moved counterclockwise, showed 11:55. "Almost midnight," the drummer announced. "Almost showtime. You should feel honored. Not many get to attend the real show." "What happens at midnight?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The same thing that happens every night," the saxophone player said, adjusting their instrument. "We play for the real audience, the ones who checked into rooms that don't exist, the ones who lost everything at tables that were never there, the ones who found love in elevators that skip floors." The suite was changing, growing. What had been maybe 1,000 square feet was expanding, walls pushing back, ceiling rising. More chairs appeared. No, not appeared. They had always been there, I just hadn't seen them before. And they weren't empty. The figures in the chairs were translucent, isn't the right word. They were there the way memories are there. Substantial, but not solid. Men in 50s suits. Women in 20s flapper dresses. Tourists from the 80s in neon windbreakers. People from times I couldn't place. Maybe from futures that hadn't happened yet. All of them watching the stage. All of them waiting. "You can leave," the piano player offered, hands poised above the keys. "The door will open for you. But if you stay, if you listen to the full performance, you'll understand why the music never really stops. Why people come to Vegas and leave different. Why the house always wins but somehow everyone thinks they can beat it. I looked at the door. It seemed miles away now, across an ocean of chairs filled with temporal echoes of gamblers and dreamers. What happens if I stay? You hear the truth, the drummer said. The truth about this city. This impossible city that shouldn't exist. A metropolis in the desert, built on nothing but hope and greed and the human need to believe that tomorrow could be different from today. 11:58. The ghostly audience was getting more solid. I could hear them now. Whispers in languages I recognized and languages I didn't. Some were crying, some were laughing. Some were counting money that had long since turned to dust. "Last chance," the saxophone player said. I stayed in my chair. 11:59. The band straightened, professional, ready. The saxophone gleamed. The piano keys beckoned. The drums waited like patient thunder. Midnight. They played. And oh, the music they made. It wasn't jazz anymore. It was every song that had ever been played in Vegas. Every wedding march from every chapel. Every funeral dirge for every dream that died at a poker table. Every victory fanfare from every slot machine. Every lonely ballad from every lounge singer at 4 a.m. when the only audience was the bartender and the ghosts. The audience swayed. Some stood and danced. Dances from their own times, all somehow in sync with the impossible rhythm. A flapper doing the Charleston with a tourist doing the electric slide. A cowboy two-stepping with a showgirl, all moving to the same beat that existed outside of time. And I could see it now, see what Vegas really was. Not a city. Not really. It was a song made of light and chance, built in a place where nothing should grow. Every casino was a verse. Every hotel was a chorus. Every visitor was a note, adding their small sound to the endless composition. "Do you understand now?" the piano player asked, fingers flying across keys that played notes in spectrums beyond human hearing. This suite, 2012, it's the heart of the song, the place where all the music comes from and returns to. We're not musicians. We're the music itself, given form just enough to play ourselves. The ghostly audience was looking at me now. All of them. Hundreds of faces from across decades, all watching the living person in their midst. "He's recording," one of them said, a woman in a 60s cocktail dress. "He's trying to capture us." I looked down at my recorder, still running, still showing impossible readings. "It won't work," the drummer said, not unkindly. "The music of 2012 can't be captured. It can only be experienced. You can record the notes, but not the meaning. The sound, but not the soul." The song reached a crescendo. The room spun, or maybe I spun, the walls blurring into streams of light. Every neon sign that had ever glowed in Vegas was there, written in the air. Every name of every casino, even the ones that existed only in plans that were never built. And then I saw myself, not reflected, but there in one of the chairs. An older me, or maybe a younger me, or maybe just a different me. He was translucent like the others, watching the stage with eyes that had seen the music and been changed by it. Everyone who truly hears the song leaves a piece of themselves here, the saxophone player explained, and takes a piece of the song with them. That's why people come back to Vegas. They're trying to find the piece they left, or leave the piece they took. The music stopped. The silence was deafening. More than silence, it was the absence of something that had always been there, like suddenly not hearing your own heartbeat. The ghostly audience applauded. The sound was like wind through empty buildings. Then, one by one, they faded, going back to their own times, their own rooms that didn't exist, until it was just me and the band again. "The show's over," the piano player said. "Until tomorrow night, and the night after, and every night since 1993, and every night until the desert takes the city back." I stood. My legs were shaky. How long had I been there? My phone said 12:47 a.m., but that couldn't be right. The performance had felt like hours, days, years. "The recording," I said. "What do I tell them?" "The hotel?" The three figures looked at each other. That made me smile again. "Tell them the truth," the drummer suggested. "That the music is supposed to be there. It's the sound of Vegas itself, playing its own song. Fighting it would be like trying to stop the desert wind. Pointless and possibly dangerous." I walked to the door. It opened before I touched it. "Wait," the saxophone player called out. "One more thing." I turned back. "You'll hear it now." The music, not just here, but everywhere in Vegas, in the ding of the elevators, in the shuffle of cards, in the hum of the air conditioning. Once you've heard the real song, you can't unhear it. They were right. I stumbled out of suite 2012 into the normal hallway. The door was gone the moment I crossed the threshold. Just that empty space between 2011 and 2013 again, like nothing had happened. But my recorder was still running, still showing those impossible readings. Janet was waiting by the regular elevators. She looked relieved and terrified in equal measure. "You were gone for 3 hours," she said. "It was 47 minutes, I protested, showing her my phone. She showed me hers. 3:17 a.m. We went to the security office. She pulled up the footage. There I was, pressing the brass button at 11:27. The door appearing. Me walking in. Then, static. For 3 hours, the camera showed nothing but static. Then me, stumbling out, looking like I'd seen the truth behind the curtain. "What was it?" she asked. "What's making the music?" I thought about how to explain. How do you tell someone that their hotel, their entire city, is a living song? That there are musicians who aren't people playing music that isn't quite music in a room that doesn't exist but has always been there? I started, then stopped. Started again. It's not a problem. The music. It's supposed to be there. It's part of the hotel. Part of Vegas. Trying to stop it would be like... I remembered the drummer's words, like trying to stop the desert wind. She stared at me. "That's it? That's your professional assessment?" I played her the recording, or tried to. What came out of my equipment was nothing, and everything. White noise that had patterns if you listened long enough. Static that sounded like distant jazz. The ghost of music, captured but not caught. "I can hear it," she whispered. "Almost. Like it's just in the other room." "It is," I told her. "It's always in the other room. The room that's not supposed to be there." She paid me. Triple rate, as promised, plus a bonus for what? For surviving. For listening. For not running away screaming. She didn't say, and I didn't ask. I left Vegas that morning, driving back through the desert as the sun came up. But the saxophone player had been right. I could hear it now, the music. In the hum of my tires on asphalt. In the whisper of sand against my windshield. In the distant thunder of planes heading to McCarran, the song of Vegas playing itself forever. It's been a month now. I'm back in Los Angeles, back to my normal jobs. Fixing sound systems, installing speakers, pretending that music is just vibrations in air, that hotels are just buildings, that cities are just places where people gather. But late at night, when I'm lying in bed, like you are right now, I hear it. That impossible jazz, that music from room 2012, and here's the thing that keeps me awake, the thing that made me need to tell this story. I've started getting calls from other hotels in other cities. The Roosevelt in Hollywood, they have a room 928 that no one can find but everyone hears music from. The Palmer House in Chicago, their 13th floor plays orchestra music at 3 a.m., even though they claim not to have a 13th floor. The Stanley in Colorado, well, everyone knows the Stanley is strange, but there's a ballroom there that only appears during the full moon, and the music that comes from it, they all want me to investigate, to record, to explain. But I know now what I'll find. The same thing. Different faces maybe, different instruments. But the same truth. Every city has its song. Every building has its rhythm. And in the spaces that don't exist, the skipped floors, the missing rooms, the doors that shouldn't be there, that's where the music lives. Where it plays itself for audiences of ghosts and memories and the occasional fool like me who presses buttons they shouldn't press. So let me ask you something, and leave your answer in the comments below. Have you ever been in a hotel and heard music you couldn't quite place? Felt like the building itself was humming? Noticed that the elevator skips a floor and wondered why? Because if you've heard that impossible music, then you've been invited to the show. And here's the real question, the one that haunts me. Once you've heard the music, really heard it, does it ever actually stop? Or does it just get quiet enough that you can pretend it's not there, waiting in the walls, playing in the spaces between spaces, calling you back to Suite 2012 or Room 928 or any of the other impossible places where the music lives? I think I already know the answer, and I think, late at night, when you're almost asleep, when you're in that space between waking and dreaming, you know it too, the music never stops. It just waits. And if you found yourself holding your breath during this story, if you felt that chill down your spine, if you're looking at your hotel room door differently now, subscribe, because I'm going to investigate the Roosevelt next week. And what I find there, well, let's just say Suite 2012 was only the beginning. The real song, the full symphony of impossible places, it's just getting started. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep after this. And remember, next time you're in Vegas and you see that missing number in the elevator, maybe take the stairs. Story number 4. The doorbell rang at 7:43 p.m. last Thursday, and my blood still hasn't stopped running cold. If you're watching this alone right now, especially if you've ever ordered food late at night, you might want to check your door is locked. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's a warning about those mysterious food deliveries that show up when you never ordered anything. The ones from places you swear you remember, but can't quite place. Stay with me till the end, because the last part of this story, well, it might save your life. Or at least help you understand why some deliveries should never, ever be accepted. And now, the story begins. My apartment in downtown Milwaukee wasn't much. Third-floor walk-up, creaky hardwood floors that groaned like they were telling secrets. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbor's microwave beeping through the walls. That Thursday started like any other. I'd been working from home, spreadsheets blurring together until my eyes burned. Coffee cups multiplying on my desk like they were breeding. The October rain had been tapping against my window all day, that steady rhythm that makes you forget there's a world outside. I hadn't ordered food, hadn't even thought about dinner yet. My fridge had leftover Chinese from Tuesday, the kind that gets better after a few days in those white cardboard boxes. When the doorbell rang, I almost didn't answer. But there's something about a doorbell at that specific time of evening, isn't there? Not quite dinner time, not quite late. That in-between hour when the world feels like it's holding its breath. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery guy in a red uniform. Not DoorDash red, not Pizza Hut red, but something older, deeper, like the color had been soaked in time. He was holding a brown paper bag, the kind with grease spots blooming through like watercolor flowers. Steam rose from it, fogging up in the hallway's fluorescent light. I opened the door, keeping the chain on. I didn't order anything. The guy looked at his phone, then back at me. His face was ordinary in that way that makes you forget it the moment you look away. Tyler Morrison? Apartment 3B? Yeah, but Thursday special from Rosario's Kitchen. Already paid for. Have a good night. He set the bag down and walked away before I could protest. His footsteps on the stairs sounded wrong somehow, like they were going up when they should have been going down. But I was already focused on the bag. Rosario's Kitchen. The name tickled something in my memory, like a word on the tip of your tongue that won't quite form. I picked up the bag. It was heavier than it looked, and warm in that comforting way that makes your stomach growl even when you're not hungry. Inside my apartment, I set it on the kitchen counter. The receipt stapled to the bag was yellowed, like it had been sitting in sunlight for years. But the text was clear. Thursday special, Tyler's usual, paid in full, enjoy. Tyler's usual? I opened the bag. The smell hit me like a physical force. Not unpleasant, but overwhelming. Garlic, rosemary, something else I couldn't place. It was chicken parmigiana, but not like any I'd seen before. The cheese was golden brown, bubbling even though the delivery had taken time. The pasta beside it was perfect, each strand distinct, coated in a red sauce that looked like it had been painted on. And suddenly, I remembered. Rosario's Kitchen. Corner of Water Street in Wisconsin. My dad used to take me there after my baseball games when I was 12. Always on Thursdays because that's when they had the chicken parm special. Mrs. Rosario would pinch my cheeks, tell me I was getting too skinny, pile extra bread on my plate. But Rosario's had closed. The memory hit me like ice water. Rosario's had closed 15 years ago. Mrs. Rosario died in a kitchen fire that took out half the block. I'd gone to the funeral with my parents, watched them lower her casket while her husband sobbed. The food sat on my counter, still steaming. I should have thrown it away. Any rational person would have thrown it away. But the smell, God, the smell was exactly right. It was like being 12 again, like my dad was about to walk through the door and ruffle my hair, ask me about my fastball. I took a bite. It was perfect, more than perfect. It was the exact taste of that specific Thursday in July when I'd struck out 9 batters and my dad had been so proud he'd ordered extra dessert. The cheese pulled away in strings. The sauce had that hint of secret ingredient Mrs. Rosario would never tell anyone. I ate the entire meal. That night, I dreamed of kitchens. Endless kitchens stretching in all directions. Stoves burning with flames that cast no shadows. And somewhere in the distance I could hear Mrs. Rosario humming, the same tune she always hummed while she cooked. But the humming was coming from underground, from somewhere deep and dark and impossibly far away. I woke up tasting garlic and regret. The empty containers sat on my kitchen counter like evidence of a crime I couldn't quite remember committing. In the harsh morning light, they looked ordinary. Cheap takeout containers, the kind you get from any restaurant in any city. But I knew what they'd contained. I knew what I'd tasted. I called in sick to work, not because I felt ill, but because I needed to understand what was happening. The receipt from the bag was still on my counter, but now it looked different. The yellow had deepened to brown, the edges curling like autumn leaves. And the text was fading, becoming harder to read with each passing hour. I drove to Water Street. The corner where Rosario's Kitchen used to be was now a Starbucks. Gleaming chrome and modern angles, nothing like the warm red brick that had once housed my childhood Thursdays. But as I stood there, sipping overpriced coffee and watching hipsters type on MacBooks, I could almost see it. The ghost outline of the old building, superimposed like a double exposure. A woman in her 70s walked by, stopped, and stared at the same spot I was staring at. "You remember it too, don't you?" she said. Her voice had an accent, slight but unmistakable, Italian, like Mrs. Rosario's had been. "Excuse me?" "The restaurant. Rosario's, you have that look, like you're seeing something that isn't there anymore." I turned to face her fully. She was small, bent with age, but her eyes were sharp and knowing. "Did you know Mrs. Rosario? Know her?" The woman laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "I was her sister, Elena Rosario. I worked in that kitchen for 30 years. My coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the sidewalk. "But you died," I whispered. "In the fire. I remember reading about it. Both sisters died." Elena tilted her head, studying me with those two sharp eyes. "Did we? Or do we just cook somewhere else now? Somewhere that doesn't burn down. Somewhere that can deliver to anywhere, anytime." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, but when I looked at it, it was blank except for an address I didn't recognize and a phone number that seemed to shift and change even as I watched. "When he comes again," she said, "ask him about the others. Ask him how many restaurants are still open in places they can't be. How many of us are still cooking for people who can't let go." She walked away, and I tried to follow her. But somehow, in the space between one step and the next, she vanished. Not around a corner, not into a building. Just gone, like she'd never been there at all. I looked down at the business card. It was yellowed now, aged, and the address was becoming clearer. It was my address, my apartment building, apartment 3B. The second delivery came exactly 1 week later. This time I was waiting. Part of me hoped it wouldn't come. Part of me, the part I didn't want to acknowledge, hoped it would. 7:43 p.m., the doorbell rang. Same delivery guy, or at least I thought it was. His face had that same quality of being immediately forgettable. Same red uniform that looked like it belonged in a different decade. But this time, the bag was white with blue stripes. "Danny's Diner," he said before I could speak. "Thursday special. Danny's Diner." My hands shook as I took the bag. Danny's had been on the north side, a 24-hour place where the coffee was always too strong and the pie was always perfect. It's where I'd had my first date with Sarah Chen in college. We'd shared a chocolate malt at 2 a.m, talking about everything and nothing. Danny's had been demolished 8 years ago to make room for condos. Inside the bag, a patty melt, exactly how I'd ordered it that night with Sarah. Extra onions, Swiss cheese perfectly melted. That special sauce they'd never tell you what was in it. Crinkle-cut fries that were still crispy. And a chocolate malt, impossibly cold, impossibly thick. I called Sarah. We hadn't talked in 3 years, not since her wedding to some investment banker in Chicago. But I had to know. "Tyler?" She sounded surprised, but not unhappy. "Is everything okay? This is going to sound crazy, but do you remember Danny's Diner?" A pause. "Of course I do. Why?" "What did we order on our first date?" She laughed, but it was nervous. "Why are you asking me this? Please, Sarah." "I need to know. You had a patty melt with extra onions. I had the turkey club. We shared a chocolate malt because we were both too broke to get two. Tyler, what's going on?" I looked at the food on my counter. "Nothing. I was thinking about it. After we hung up, I ate the meal. Every bite tasted like that night, like possibility. Like the moment before you know if someone's going to kiss you back. Like being 22 and believing everything was going to work out exactly how you planned. But there was something else in the taste now. Something I hadn't noticed the first time with Rosario's. A bitter undertone, like sadness made edible, like the flavor of endings you don't see coming. That night, the dreams were different. I was in Danny's, but it was empty. All the booths were set with fresh silverware, coffee cups turned upside down on saucers. The jukebox was playing, but it was songs I'd never heard, songs that seemed to be playing backwards. And in the kitchen, I could see shadows moving, preparing orders for customers who would never come. When I woke up, there was a voicemail on my phone from Sarah. Timestamp, 3:33 a.m. Her voice was different, distant, like she was calling from very far away. Tyler, I had the strangest dream. We were at Danny's, but it wasn't really Danny's, and you were there. But you weren't really you, and I kept trying to tell you something. Something important, but every time I opened my mouth, all that came out was the taste of chocolate malt. Call me back. I think something's wrong. I tried calling her back, but the number was disconnected. When I looked it up online, Sarah Chen had no listings in Chicago. No social media, no professional profiles, nothing. It was like she'd never existed at all. I spent the next few days in the archives of the Milwaukee Public Library. The librarian, a woman named Mrs. Chen, who bore an uncomfortable resemblance to Sarah, helped me navigate the microfiche machines. Looking for something specific? She asked. Old restaurants, I told her. Places that closed down. I'm writing an article about local food history. She smiled, but something in her expression made my skin crawl. Oh, we have lots of those. Milwaukee has always been a city that eats its past, sometimes literally. The first thing I found was the article I remembered, Lost Restaurants of Milwaukee, from 2015. But when I read it more carefully, I noticed something strange. The reporter's byline was familiar. Tyler Morrison. My name. But I'd never written for the Milwaukee Journal in my life. The article mentioned 12 restaurants, all places I'd eaten at, all places that had mattered to me in some way. And according to this article I'd apparently written, all of them had closed due to tragic circumstances. Fires, accidents, sudden deaths of beloved owners. But there was a sidebar I hadn't noticed before. A small box with the headline, The Thursday Phenomenon. Local residents report occasional food deliveries from establishments that have been closed for years. While no delivery services admit to these runs, the phenomenon persists. It's always on Thursday, says longtime resident Margaret Walsh. Always at the same time. And it's always exactly what you used to order. City health officials advise residents not to consume food from unknown sources, but no incidents have been reported. The deliveries seem to target individuals with strong emotional connections to the closed establishments. It's like they're trying to complete unfinished business, suggests Dr. Patricia Kellerman, a local psychologist who studies grief and memory. Some people can't let go of places that were important to them. Maybe some places can't let go either. My hands were shaking as I printed the article. At the bottom, there was a note I'd missed. This story is part of an ongoing investigation. If you have experienced Thursday deliveries from closed restaurants, please contact the author at... The contact information was my phone number, my email address, my home address. I ran to the circulation desk. Mrs. Chen, this article, do you know anything about it? But the desk was empty. A sign hung from the computer. Librarian stepped out, back in 5 minutes. But when I waited, she never came back. And when I asked other staff members, they all looked at me strangely. Mrs. Chen? There's no Mrs. Chen working here. The reference librarian is Mr. Patterson. Has been for 15 years. I looked back at the microfiche machine. The article was still there, but the byline had changed. Now it read anonymous. And the sidebar about Thursday deliveries was gone, like it had never existed at all. The third Thursday, I tried to leave. I went to my friend Marcus's place across town. We were halfway through a Lakers game when my phone buzzed. A delivery notification, but not from any app I had installed. Just a text from an unknown number. Order delivered to your door. When I got home at 11 p.m., the bag was still there. Still warm, still fresh. Lou's Pizza from Racine. The place my grandmother had taken me to every summer. Closed since 2009 when Lou had a heart attack right there in the kitchen, hand still on the dough he was tossing. The pizza was exactly how Lou made it. Thin crust with those little burnt bubbles, sausage that he made himself, fennel seeds and all. The exact ratio of sauce to cheese that nobody could ever replicate. I ate it cold the next morning, and it still tasted like summer, like being 8 years old, like my grandmother was still alive. But this time I paid attention to more than just the taste. The box the pizza came in was old, really old. The cardboard was soft and yellowed, the logo faded until it was barely visible, and there was writing on the inside of the lid. Not printed, but handwritten in pencil. Tell Nonna I'm sorry I couldn't save her. Tell her the bread recipe is safe. Tell her Thursday will always be her day. Lou. I'd never told anyone that my grandmother's name was Nonna. That's what I called her, but it wasn't her real name. And Lou couldn't have known about our Thursday tradition. Could he? By the fourth Thursday, I was ready. I'd set up my phone to record the hallway. I'd looked up every delivery service in Milwaukee, called them all. None of them had heard of deliveries from closed restaurants. The guy at Grubhub actually laughed, thought I was pranking him. I'd also done research, spent hours in the library, going through old newspapers, Rosario's Kitchen, Danny's Diner, Lou's Pizza. They'd all closed, all their owners dead. But there were others, too. Restaurants that had been beloved, had been part of people's lives, then vanished. The Milwaukee Journal had run a piece in 2015 about lost restaurants of Milwaukee. Every place that had delivered to me was on that list. But I'd also found something else. Death records. And what I discovered made my blood run cold. Mrs. Rosario and her sister Elena died in the kitchen fire just like I remembered. Danny from Danny's Diner. Heart attack at age 62, found slumped over the grill. Lou from Lou's Pizza. Exactly as I'd heard. Heart attack while making dough. But there were others. Other restaurant owners, other chefs, other people who'd spent their lives feeding others. All dead, all died at their work, all on Thursdays. And according to the records, they'd all died at exactly 7:43 p.m. At 7:43 p.m., I was standing by my door, looking through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Then, between one blink and the next, he was there. Not walking up, not coming from the stairs, just there, standing with another bag. I yanked open the door. "Who are you?" He smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him actually smile, and I wished he hadn't. His teeth were perfect, too perfect, like they'd been drawn by someone who'd never actually seen real teeth. "Thursday special from the Golden Dragon," he said, "your usual." The Golden Dragon, where my mom had taken me the day she told me about the divorce. I'd been 14, trying not to cry into my sweet and sour pork while she explained that sometimes people grow apart. "These restaurants are all closed," I said. "They've been closed for years. Some of them for decades." He tilted his head. "Are they?" "You know they are." "What is this? What do you want?" "We don't want anything, Tyler. We're just delivering what was ordered." "I didn't order anything." "Didn't you?" He set the bag down. "Every Thursday night, you sit in that apartment. You think about the places you used to go, the people you used to be with, the person you used to be. That's an order, Tyler. That's always been an order." That doesn't make sense." "Thursday used to be your favorite day," he continued. "Date night with Sarah, game night with your dad, pizza day at Grandma's. Now, Thursday is just another day to eat leftover Chinese and watch Netflix. But you remember, don't you? You order those memories every single Thursday. We just deliver them." He turned to leave. "Wait." I grabbed his arm. It was solid but wrong, like grabbing a mannequin that was pretending to be warm. "What happens if I don't eat it? What happens if I throw it away?" He looked at me, and for just a moment his face flickered, like a TV changing channels. I saw other faces, dozens of them, all superimposed, all delivery drivers, all forgotten. Everyone eats their memories, Tyler. That's why they're delivered. After he left, I brought the bag inside. The Golden Dragon's orange chicken, exactly how they made it. Sweet, sticky, with those little dried peppers they'd warn you not to eat. Fortune cookies that I knew, without opening, would have fortunes I'd already received years ago. I didn't eat it. I sat there, watching it get cold, watching the sauce congeal, watching it become what it really was, just food from nowhere, from nothing, from restaurants that didn't exist anymore. My phone rang at midnight. Unknown number. "You didn't eat your delivery." The voice wasn't the delivery guy. It was older, tired, like someone calling from very far away. "Who is this?" "You need to eat your delivery, Tyler. The orders have to be completed." "Why? What happens if they're not?" A pause. "The restaurants need to close, Tyler. They need to finally close. But they can't. Not while there are still orders pending. Still, memories hungry for what they used to taste like. Every Thursday, all across the city, people like you remember. And we have to deliver. We have to keep delivering until all the orders are filled." That's insane, is it? How many times have you driven past where Rosario's used to be? How many times have you thought about that chicken parm? That's an order, Tyler. An order that echoes. An order that won't let the dead rest. The line went dead. I threw the food away, tied up the garbage bag, took it straight to the dumpster. But the next morning, when I opened my fridge for milk, there it was. The Golden Dragon's orange chicken, fresh as if it had just been delivered, still warm. That Friday, I did something I'd never done before. I talked to my neighbors. Mrs. Patterson in 3A had lived in the building for 20 years. When I asked her about Thursday deliveries, her face went pale. "You get them too?" she whispered. I thought I was losing my mind. Her Thursday deliveries came from Smiley's Sandwich Shop, the place where she'd worked as a teenager, where she'd met her late husband, where she'd eaten lunch every day for 6 years until they closed when the owner got sick. "It's always the same sandwich," she said. "Turkey and Swiss on rye, extra pickles. That's what Harold ordered on our first date. I haven't eaten one like that since he died, but every Thursday." David in 2C got deliveries from a Chinese place called the Jade Garden. His parents had taken him there to celebrate when he got into college. They'd closed after a gas leak explosion killed 3 people, including the owner's daughter. "The lo mein tastes exactly like hope," he said, and started crying, like everything was still possible. Apartment 1B was empty, had been for months. But the mailman, a guy named Pete, who'd been on this route for 15 years, told me something that made my skin crawl. Used to be an old lady lived there, Mrs. Henderson. She moved out last winter, but I still deliver there sometimes. Not mail, mind you. Food, always on Thursday evenings. I leave it by the door, and by morning, it's gone. I asked building management about Mrs. Henderson. They'd never heard of her. According to their records, 1B had been vacant for over 2 years. But when I snuck down there that Thursday evening, sure enough, at 7:43 p.m. there was a delivery. A bag from Henderson's Home Cooking, a restaurant that, according to my research, had never existed. The bag sat there all night, but by morning it was gone, and the hallway smelled like pot roast and loneliness. I started mapping it. The deliveries weren't just in my building. They were happening all over Milwaukee, all over the state, all over the country. Online forums were full of people sharing similar stories. Always Thursday evenings. Always 7:43 p.m. Always from places that had closed, often tragically. One woman in Denver got deliveries from her grandfather's deli. He'd died in a robbery, but every Thursday she'd find his famous pastrami sandwich waiting for her. A man in Seattle received weekly orders from a seafood place that burned down. He'd proposed to his wife there 30 years ago. A family in New Orleans got beignets from a cafe that had been destroyed in Katrina. The same cafe where their daughter had celebrated her 5th birthday, 3 days before she drowned. The pattern was always the same: emotional connection, tragic ending, Thursday deliveries that wouldn't stop. And according to every story I read, the food was always perfect. Too perfect. Like it had been prepared by people who remembered not just the recipe but the love that had gone into making it. I tried everything the next week. I stayed at a hotel. The delivery came to my room. I drove to Chicago. It was waiting at my apartment when I got back. I even tried ordering from real restaurants, thinking maybe I could confuse the system. But at 7:43 p.m., regular as clockwork, there he was. This time, the bag was different. Black paper, no logo. Heavy and cold, despite the steam rising from it. "Final delivery," the guy said. And his voice was different too. Older, sadder. From all of them. All of who? Everyone who ever cooked for you. Everyone who ever served you. Everyone whose food became part of your story. They've been waiting, Tyler. Waiting to finish their last orders. Waiting to close properly. Inside the bag, impossible amounts of food. Mrs. Rosario's chicken parm, Danny's patty melt, Lou's pizza, the orange chicken, but more too. My grandmother's apple pie, the one she'd make every Thanksgiving. Still warm, still smelling like cinnamon and home. A sandwich from the shop near my first job, where Tony would always add extra capicola without charging me. Soup from the place near the hospital, where I'd eaten every day while my dad was dying. Where the owner had learned my name, learned not to ask how things were going. Birthday cake from the bakery that closed after the owner's daughter died. The exact cake for my 10th birthday, when everything had still been perfect. A burger from the drive-in where I'd taken my first girlfriend. A slice of pizza from the place that stayed open late during finals week. Coffee and donuts from the shop where I'd hidden after my mother's funeral, not ready to face the house without her. All of it. Every taste that had ever mattered. Every meal that had been more than just food. "If you eat it all," the delivery guy said, "it ends. The restaurants can close. The cooks can rest. The memories can finally just be memories. And if I don't, then we deliver forever, Tyler. Every Thursday in every city. To everyone who can't let go. And the list gets longer. Places close, but they don't end. They just join the route." I sat at my table looking at the feast of ghosts. Each bite would be perfect. I knew that. Each taste would bring back moments I'd lost. My father's laugh, my grandmother's hands teaching me to roll dough, Sarah's smile over a chocolate malt, Mrs. Rosario calling me skinny boy and piling my plate high. But they were gone. All of them. Either dead or moved on. And these tastes, these perfect reproductions, they weren't bringing them back. They were keeping me from letting them go. I started eating, the chicken parm first, and as I ate, I could see Mrs. Rosario. Not young, not old, but somehow outside of time. Standing in a kitchen that existed nowhere and everywhere. She smiled at me, nodded, and slowly faded. The pizza next, Lou, tossing dough in an endless loop, finally let it fall. He caught my eye, winked, and dissolved like flour in water. Each bite was a goodbye. Each swallow was a closing. The restaurants, the people, the memories, all finally allowed to rest. But with each taste, I also saw the others. All the people still trapped in the delivery cycle. Mrs. Patterson upstairs, still receiving sandwiches from a husband who couldn't let go. David in 2C, living on hope that tasted like lo mein. Thousands of others across the country, all being fed by the ghosts of places that had mattered too much to die properly. I ate until I couldn't anymore. There was still food left. There would always be food left. But I'd eaten enough. Enough to matter. Enough to count. The delivery guy was still standing in my doorway when I looked up. But he was different now. Younger. Clearer. Just a kid, really, probably working his way through college. "Thank you," he said. And I realized he wasn't the delivery guy at all. He was everyone who'd ever served me. Everyone who'd ever cooked for me. Everyone who'd made food that became memory. "Will it stop now?" I asked. "For you, yes. But, Tyler, there are so many orders, so many people who can't let go. Every Thursday we deliver. Every Thursday someone else gets their first bag." He left, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that he wouldn't be back. Not for me. But sometimes, on Thursday nights, I hear doorbells in my building. Footsteps in the hallway. The rustle of bags being set down. And I wonder who's getting their delivery. Who's tasting their past. Who's being asked to finally let their ghosts rest. It's been 6 months since my last delivery. The Thursday evenings are quieter now. Lonelier, if I'm being honest, but they're mine again. No longer haunted by the weight of perfect memories. I've started cooking for myself. Not well, but with intention. Each meal is just what it is. Food, sustenance. Nothing more, nothing less. And somehow, that's enough. But I still research. Still map the deliveries. Still try to understand the scope of what I stumbled into. The network is vast. Thousands of restaurants, all closed tragically. All still operating in some impossible space between memory and reality. All delivering to people who loved them too much to let them go. I've started a website, ThursdayDeliveries.com, a place for people to share their stories, to find others who understand, to learn how to say goodbye. The responses pour in daily. Stories of meals that taste like childhood, of restaurants that refuse to stay closed, of delivery drivers who look like everyone and no one. And slowly, very slowly, some people are learning to let go, to eat their final meals, to allow their ghosts to rest. But for every person who breaks free, there are 10 more who receive their first delivery. The cycle spreads. The network grows. And every Thursday at exactly 7:43 p.m., doorbells ring across the country. If you're watching this, and you've ever had food delivered from a place you can't quite remember, a restaurant you're sure you know but can't find online, if it comes on a Thursday, at that particular time when the world holds its breath, don't refuse it. But don't get lost in it either. Eat what you need to eat. Say goodbye to what you need to release. And then let the restaurants close. Let them all finally close. Because here's the thing I learned. The horrifying, beautiful truth. We're all haunted by the meals we can't have again. The tables we can't sit at. The people we can't share with. And sometimes those ghosts get hungry too. They need to feed one last time before they can rest. Your Thursday delivery isn't really about the food. It's about the goodbye you never got to say. So, if this story resonated with you, if you've got your own Thursday deliveries or memories that taste too real to let go, leave a comment below. Share your story. Because I have a feeling, a terrible, wonderful feeling, that I'm not the only one who's been fed by restaurants that don't exist anymore. And if you're wondering whether this was real or just a story, well, check your doorbell camera from last Thursday. You might be surprised what you find, or what you don't. Sweet dreams, and remember, some deliveries come whether you order them or not.